This tutorial is about best practices with on-tick, timers, and bindings. Basically, what this all relates to is events that are constantly firing off all the time in your game. And the more that occurs, the poorer your performance is because the busier you're making the computer. So you want to eliminate, cut down, trim, and mitigate as much as possible in this area. So the first thing is bindings. These are in widgets. These bind options here, you want to avoid using this at all possible. Originally, when I started working with Unreal Engine, then the binding was right there, and it's like, oh, well, I'll just use this. Boom. Didn't even think about it. But they're a really, really bad idea. They're constantly updating, and most of the stuff they're updating doesn't need to be updating multiple times per second. So now I don't use bind anywhere. So what I do instead is trigger off events that occur and update what is going on in the widget, the labels on the buttons or whatever the bindings would normally be associated with. So originally, you would set up a bind function that would constantly update the text in this box. Now instead, what I did is I set up a timer because for this particular box, it's triggered off you selecting or deselecting an asset, which as far as I can tell, there aren't any events in Unreal Engine for identifying this occurring. So I couldn't get my preview here to update. Let me select an actual asset. Tools. There we go. And it updates. And then when I change what I'm clicking on, it updates. And I couldn't get it to do that based on a triggered event. So what I had to do was set up a timer. And so instead of that updating 30 times a second or 60 times a second or 120 times a second, whatever your frame rate is, this just updates 5 times per second, every 0.2 seconds. So it uses exponentially fewer resources. And as you can see, setting up a timer is very simple to do. There's two ways of setting up a timer. You can do a timer by event or you can do a timer by function, and I'll show you both of them. So whenever possible, don't use binds at all. Now, if it's something that triggers off an event that you can identify, for example, clicking on a button or entering text into a field or something like that, then all you do is put your button updates, the label updates, or whatever it is that you want to update, you want to change, rather than doing it in a binding function, you just add it into the triggered event. So when this button gets clicked, it renames all the associated text boxes. Or here, we are entering text into a field. So when the text is entered, you change the contents of the box. So if no text is being entered or no buttons are being clicked, nothing's happening. No resources are being wasted. Now, another example would be your HUD, where say you're updating, we'll show here, you're updating your health and your stamina. So as we're running along, stamina gets updated, and we go along over here and we take damage, the health gets updated. And you'll also notice that when the health updates, it doesn't update instantly. It slowly slides over, the color changes over time. And now normally you would need to do that with a binding because it is something that happens over time and a simple function call happens instantaneously. So what I had to do was trigger it with a timer. So this is doing another timer, but this one is by function rather than by event. And so I call this function, which is in my HUD widget. So I have a reference to the HUD widget here. And I set the frequency of the timer and whether or not it loops. Now, this isn't something that I want to loop infinitely. I want it to run for a certain period of time until whatever the event that I want to occur is finished, and then I want the timer to stop. So the way you do that is where the timer is, the function here that is linked to the timer inside the function itself, you have a check for, is your end condition met? And if so, you clear the timer and the timer goes away. So this allows you to have something that happens on tick type frequency, but a frequency that you control rather than it automatically going every frame. It goes based on the time that you set. So in this case, 0.02 seconds. And then in this case, down here, 0.2 seconds, only 5 times per second. And this allows you to have a rapidly firing event that occurs only when you want it to occur and only for as long as you want it to occur, and then it stops. So resource isn't being wasted. If your character's not taking any damage, you don't need to be updating your HUD. In the case of when, like as I said here, where you can't know when someone has selected or deselected an asset, then you have to have it firing all the time. So this one is infinitely looping, but it's not infinitely looping 30, 60, or 120 times a second. It's only infinitely looping 5 times per second. So greatly saving on resources. So for setting up one based on an event, you just set up a delegate event just like this, and then whatever it is you want in the event. And there is a bit of extra options here. Let me move this over here and expand it out. You can also have a delay before the timer starts, and you can randomize how long that delay is if you want. But the basic functionality of the event is simply you either have, a timer. You either have it selected to an event like this, setting up a delegate, whether or not it's looping, and the frequency that it is repeating, or you do it based on a function where you just give it the function name. If the function is in the same object that is calling it, then you simply do it like this, reference self. If the function exists somewhere else in some other blueprint, you just connect it to a reference to that. Give it the name of the function, and now you can fire it when you want, as fast as you want, for as long as you want, and no more. Hopefully you guys found this helpful. Have a good one.